So, good afternoon, everyone. Michael McGowan here. Some of you will know me, some of you won't, or some of you might know me remotely or digitally as well. And I've got my colleagues, Vidal and John, with me this afternoon. Just by, for those of you who don't know me, I'm based in Dublin. I've been working with sales teams for the past 20 years now. Probably better known for working with sales teams on the pipeline side, building sales processes and architectures. And this is a pretty new venture. It's more the sales training side of things. It's an area I would have done some work in over the years, but it was a sort of a blend of the pipeline side and the training side. And the reason I'm here today is I came across the platform Salesably about 18 months ago, and it caught my eye immediately. And just when ChatGPT and AI was becoming, I suppose, a conversation point, it was actually Vidal who reached out to me. And as soon as I saw the platform, I knew there was something going on here. So John Greaves was a former colleague of mine in the US, and he's now involved with the platform as well. I'll maybe get Vidal and John to introduce themselves first, and then we'll look at the agenda. Yeah. I know there's some people still popping in. Yeah. Vidal, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi. So my name is Vidal Graupera. I am the founder of Salesably, and I'm an engineer. I'm not an expert in sales. I don't pretend to be an expert in sales at all. And I have the privilege to work with Michael and John here, who have 20 plus years, and Jody now also is helping 20 plus years experience in sales. Each of them, they've really helped a lot to shape the platform. And I hope you enjoy hearing from them today, of how they've been using it. And I started this, language is so important, let's just say. And I personally always struggle with saying the right thing. And I think it's very interesting how you can use these large language models to help with conversations. And with that, maybe I'll turn it over to John to introduce himself.
Hi, everyone. My name is John Greaves. I'm the president, owner of Next Step Sales Management. I've been in the senior living arena for 20 years. And I've been with Next Step Sales Management for 9, been the owner for 5. I got excited when I was first introduced to Vidal via Michael, because it was very clear that a major issue we had with our sales training was about to get addressed, and it was going to get addressed in a way that was unexpected and wonderful. We've always had a difficult time enabling guided practice after explaining and demonstrating what we want from sales teams. And so this platform has been a lovely thing. I didn't realize at the time how much power we could unlock on the messaging side, on the marketing side, until later. I viewed it as a glorified batting cage, but in fact, we've now realized this is a platform for extending the vision and values of any organization. I'm very excited about where this platform has come over the last year.
Okay, thanks, John. Okay, just very quickly there, the agenda. I'm going to introduce an idea today called language-led differentiation. I'll explain what that means in a moment, and then how to use AI tooling, but obviously in the form of a product, to build what we call a practice studio. And that was really my initial attraction to the AI piece, but also to what Vidal was doing, in that it wasn't a role play tool, it was a practice tool. And I was even pretty impressed with the, if you like, the version minus 1.0 of it 18 months ago. We're going to bring you through then how a practice studio works, and we call it guided practice. And I will show you the mechanisms for that, and then some new metrics that you can introduce as well into your sales team. But the big picture is, when Vidal reached out to me initially to say that he was working on a platform and he wanted to talk to some trainers. And I remember quite clearly what I said to him at the time is that there's actually no way to train salespeople. It might seem an odd thing for a trainer to say, but that's actually true in many ways. I know some of the people on the webinar have worked with me as well. I've actually done training for their salespeople, but when I say there's no way to train salespeople, there's no way to train them to the level you want to get them to, or that they deserve to get to. And that's part of a bigger problem. And that's why we call the webinar the Sea of Sameness, that all of us, when we get up on a Monday morning, we're facing in to essentially what is a sea of sameness in sales terms. Most things look and sound the same, or the buyers don't really have a lot of time to distinguish between us. And I think that's one of the great opportunities now, because John, I think you were making this point to me when we were preparing for the webinar, that the last person in a company we see as a differentiator is in fact a salesperson, that we go to enormous lengths to get our product to differentiate us, or engineering, or our business model, for example. But salespeople aren't necessarily seen as the differentiators. And the hypothesis I'm working with now is, far from AI, for example, damaging the sales profession or doing salespeople out of jobs, I think it's going to help them become the differentiators in a business. That necessarily isn't necessarily applicable to all businesses, but I think particularly to most B2B, but also to a lot of consumer businesses, where if you like, the skill and the expertise and the fluency of the salesperson actually becomes a differentiator. And it's that process we want to share with you today, on how to bring salespeople to that level. And this is the bit I wanted to share with you initially, because this was the feedback when I started using an AI platform. This wasn't using ChatGPT or any of those. This was actually using Vidal's Salesably platform. I noticed something straight away. It was much better at language than me. And when you're in the sales business, you're in the language business. And I noticed it started to give me language that I might have been able to come up with, but probably would have taken years. So in fact, there's certain terms we use today, and we actually got it from the platform. One of them is terms like practice playbook. And I think, Vidal, am I right in saying it was my initial feedback that sort of encouraged you to keep going with the tool as well? Would that be right?
Oh, definitely. And I do remember we would use the tool. And these language models are very good at turning a phrase, and they would turn these phrases like language-led differentiation. And you would call me up and tell me, wow, this is really interesting. And so then we started going down this path of doing that.
So I was starting to pick up language from it that it's not necessarily I was looking for magic words or anything like that. It's that AI, because it is a language tool and it's better than most human beings at it, it's just very good at recognizing patterns. And what I noticed in particular was it was very good at putting words on things that thought you were trying to say. So it was very good at reading between the lines. And that really is at the core of all AI, certainly the language part of it. So that was my first experience of it, because I was testing it myself to see, could I actually improve by using it? And then we started to introduce it to the early clients, and they started having the exact same experience with it. But we had another experience as well with a very early client, where the CEO of the company had literally, I was in the building that afternoon, and he had been out on 2 sales calls with the sales reps in the morning. And he said, look, we could have been any company in that meeting in those meetings this morning, because we're pretty much using the language that everybody else uses. So there's no way we could be differentiated. And he said at that time, he said, is there any way to ban words in a sales team? That you say to people, hey, don't use those words because they make it sound like everyone else. It's not that they're bad words in themselves or anything like that. So I picked a few here. We have a little demo company that we've invented, but it's in the sustainability area. It's words that are commonly used in industries and we never give them a second thought. But when you're in this sales world, you're thinking, why isn't this getting differentiated? Why are we differentiating instead of using the words that everyone else is using? In fact, we immediately introduced banned words into the tool so that we could tell people the words that weren't really meant to use, that they could spot that during the practices as well. And this has now turned into what we call language-led differentiation, where really you're using your language more than anything else to differentiate yourself. Not a particularly easy task, by the way. I think, certainly companies we've introduced this to, we've also given it in quite a number of occasions to non-sales people. And they've said to us, there's so much more to sales than I ever thought. Sales looks simple. You just hire people and they talk and people give them money. There's a bit more to it than that. We use a little model as well. We call it the building blocks of sales capability. And anybody in this webinar is well familiar with some of the items on this, part of your sales capability is building your sales architecture, accurate sales pipelines, forecasts, good weekly governance, qualification, and all of that. And then on the other side, we have the manager with all of his or her tools, but there's a huge gap in sales competency, call it, or sales capability, but it comes in particular to two items, and one of them is language and one is fluency. And what I've worked with thousands and thousands of salespeople in many hundreds of companies, and there's a very common theme to all of them. They're not lacking value. Companies all offer good value. Probably the youngest company I work with is about 8 years old. So they're well established. I think the oldest one I work with is 250 years old. So there's no shortage of value on offer. But very often what they have is they have very good value propositions and they have very good messaging, but they just lack the language to get it to the marketplace, or at least at the resolution level is required. Or you could say in very ordinary English, they undersell themselves, not because of their messaging, but because of their language. And I often make the distinction that if you're in the marketing game, for example, you're in the messaging business, but if you're in sales, you're in the language business. And you might have a positioning strategy, you might have all the different pieces, but what sales needs is language. And then when we acquire that language, we need to get fluent in it. And it's really the fluency piece that differentiates you. And that's something to ask yourselves, are salespeople fluent in our language of differentiation? Because that really is the edge in sales. We really only have our language at the end of the day. It doesn't matter how good the product is. It doesn't matter how different it is. Nobody really gets that unless we have the language and the fluency. And that's what we wanted to solve with this AI platform approach. At last, we had a tool that we could solve the middle bits here. And this isn't about more sales training or learning a new methodology and everything will be better. It's about taking what we currently have and amplifying it and turning it into a more powerful language and becoming fluent in that language as well. What we've learned, and this has all been gradual as we've gone through the year, we've added the pieces as we went along, and really the product itself has been built pretty much from the ground up based on what customers were saying to us as well. So we look at the world through building blocks of language. In other words, rather than saying we have new magic scripts, it's not about that at all. It's much more about how would you build a language for your company that, first of all, is manager-led. In other words, a manager has decided this is the standard we want to work to. It's quality control language. It's gone through quality control and it can be practiced. And we end up with everyone saying the same thing, but in their own words. And that's kind of the high ground really of sales. And it's not an area that you hear a lot of emphasis on. There's no shortage of magic scripts around the place if you read LinkedIn on an average day. But having your own quality control language is a different day's work completely. And it would have been impossible to build a language for your company at this level without AI. And I just want to underline that point that the AI part of it has made certain things possible. It has made it possible to basically capture and codify your whole company narrative, produce a language for the salespeople. But we immediately ran into a challenge was, how do we take what you already have and then turn it into a language? Really, the whole idea behind the platform and this approach is that I'd say 99% of companies on this webinar, they're going to have all the pieces I have on the screen here in terms of content and probably lots more. And what customers were beginning to say to us was, look, we don't want to invent anything new. We have tons of content. The question is, how do we convert it into literally a studio or into some format where people would have a sales language rather than just messaging or a playbook? And then they could practice that. They could literally dive in and practice it. And that's where the concept really came from. That's what attracted me. One of the things that attracted me initially was I had my own private studio where I could go off and practice my language. And the only thing judging me was a bot, not a person judging me. Although managers can see scores and all that sort of thing. it's a very innovative idea, but people took to it pretty quickly. They could see what we were doing, and it was non-threatening and non-embarrassing as well. One of the things we do is we make a point of saying, look, we're not a role play tool. I don't know what your opinions are on role play. I never really rated role play very highly as a training tool. I think it looks good, but doesn't produce very much. Whereas this isn't a role play tool. It's like a gym. You go in, you practice your individual skills, and then you build them into what we call sales plays, actually. In other words, you aggregate them up. The sales is a very compound type of skill. It's got many skills underneath it. What I want to show you now is how we, again, using AI technology, we can take existing content and begin to turn it into not just a new playbook or language playbook. It's like a language library. And that's one of the analogies I use sometimes, is to say, there's not even playbooks we really need. It's like a language library for the company, so that when a call comes in, let's just take a very simple situation. I think, John, that's the example you use. It can be as simple as just doing a good inbound call. Yeah. Which I think a lot of companies on here probably get loads of those calls in. And the difference here could be getting 1 million in business and getting 10 grand in business. I don't know if that was the example you used, John, but I think you gave that example when we were preparing for this. If you want, yes, maybe speak to that for a second. Yeah.
Yeah. In my particular vertical, the area that I spend a lot more time in, the first point of contact is also an enormous source of failure. And it's the experience someone has when they initially reach out to one of the communities that we work with. And so simply focusing in our first learning path for the studio on what does the receptionist say? How do they transfer that conversation to a sales counselor who can really be of use? And, that just getting that right is enough to justify the entire investment for the particular portfolio. Now, all the work we're doing with sales managers, and that's of course the meat of it, but there's enough value just in that simple conversation to warrant making a move towards something like this.
So one of the phrases we use sometimes is getting reps conversation ready, because the issue here isn't really, can people sell? If you're in sales, there's a reasonably good chance you can sell, but it's probably the wrong question. The real question is, are we actually conversation ready? And are we in command of the conversation that represents our company's value proposition? And in particular, have we a whole language for that? That it's not so much that they're magic words or anything like that. It's that we leave a sound behind us. The way that the differentiation is in the sound. That's obviously getting harder these days as more is done through digital. You can even leave a sound through your written word, but certainly through Zoom calls and team calls and so on as well. And the telephone, it's an incredibly important part of the sales toolkit. I'm going to show you here, we've invented a little company called Ecosphere, which is a sustainability platform. It automates all your sustainability tracking and accounting. So it'll be a pretty standard types. It's a SaaS product. And the idea here is that you have a website at a minimum, and using the platform, you begin to develop a new language playbook. So I just want to tell you some of the little stories here that we realized or experienced while we were doing this. Take something as simple as your value proposition. First of all, our experience is value propositions never arrive in the sales department, or seldom do. They might exist in marketing. They don't get to the sales department, and they certainly don't get turned into a language for sales. For example, they wouldn't get certified with sales. In other words, do you understand what the value proposition is? Could you articulate it, for example? But we also would have come across plenty of clients and they wouldn't have even had a value proposition. But AI is well capable of generating that from your website, for example. So in fact, where we start with companies is this little set that you see on the screen here, which is to get your value proposition, your product market category, ideal customers, the alternatives to what you do. And one of the reasons we do this is it gets people in the business talking about these items and immediately begin to notice there's not great alignment sometimes, even around the value proposition, or a few people know about it, but the others don't know about it, or they actually disagree in it. or they can't agree in the market category, for example, or even on their segments. And salespeople said to us, this was unusual that they ever got to talk about this, because it was talked about generally in the company. But now they were actually in a tool and they were looking at it saying, I don't even agree with what's on the screen, guys. It's actually not. I don't think it's what we do. Look, the marketing people developed that and that's what we do. But of course, the two had never really communicated. So it was interesting just to do this alone and to talk to product, talk to marketing, talk to sales, and actually to get them doing this together. Now, what's really interesting is what we did when the tool did this for them. In other words, when we pointed the tool at the website and said, look, this is the answers coming back, was people would quite frequently disagree with it. But the interesting thing was the AI was reading the website, or the AI was reading the deck. So it wasn't telling lies. It was actually just, if you like, looking at the pattern of what was on your website and saying, this is roughly what you're saying. If it's not what you meant, if it's not what you meant, that's a different issue. But this is what your value proposition is according to the website that you have out there. And I think it's one of the interesting things. People don't tend to argue with maybe technology as much as they might argue with a person or a consultant. This was a very interesting exercise to do to begin with. And then we started to move it on to say, okay, could we start to develop a language for sales out of this, and to put a complete shape on what you're currently doing through sales eyes? And the first thing Vidal started to develop in detail was the persona playbook. In other words, we said, let's look at all your content, websites, decks, videos, and so on. What are likely to be your key personas? And I noticed something straight away when I'm just going to call it the AI, but it's actually the Salesably platform. When it generated the personas for me, I noticed straight away it was much more accurate than anything I could have built myself in terms of the description of the people you sell to. And we were lucky in the early days, we're dealing with a few bigger companies as well, and they already had marketing personas. But when they looked at what the AI was capable of doing and what platforms are capable of doing, they began to see in a sales world, it's completely different. You need a lot more information. I think Vidal, maybe you want to say a bit about this, but interesting. You said you weren't from sales earlier on, and I know you're not from sales, but your early personas weren't a million miles from this. Yeah, in terms of what you developed originally. So I think it's one of the things you're probably pretty proud of, that the personas you've developed are first class.
Thank you. The personas are very interesting, and we spent time creating a structure for them and what would be the attributes that are relevant for sales conversations. We've worked and tested a lot to try to make them accurate, not just like a generic persona. We've iterated on this many times, Michael. So I think we have a pretty good format now for a persona.
Yeah, it's been very interesting. So the tool can generate a persona instantly. We don't need to go into that. Like in the screen here was generated by the tool. And then you go in and you do a little bit of touching up. But it's interesting when people go in then to do the editing, that they only change about 20% of what the tool has actually generated, which is what people love, by the way. Nobody wants to go reinventing stuff here from scratch. Managers say to us, look, I don't want more work. I don't want any platforms that take over my life. I just want the stuff done pretty fast and accurately, but produce the key metrics that a buyer would have in mind that would apply to a particular role. This year, we've got Vice President of Global Supply Chain. What would be their hidden concerns, their decision criteria? How do they make decisions? What are their pain points? And these always need a little bit of touching up, but not hugely, because when people looked at it, they said, it's far more accurate than anything we have actually built ourselves anyway. It's more comprehensive. And by the way, the reason Vidal developed this is that this is who you interact with in the practices. So you now have a bot persona to interact with, which is usually far more comprehensive than any real buyer you deal with. People say to us, it's not real. Of course it's not real. It's AI, but covers a lot more ground. These people have a much bigger map of their role than a real person. You might think that's contradictory, but it's not, because they'll pose questions to you that you said, I could have been working here for 2 years before I would have even realized that question existed. The other thing you can do here is you can tell the persona to ask certain questions. So the manager can now populate this in a way to say, this is what I want people getting fluent in. These are the real questions people ask out there or could ask in the marketplace. And you get little prompts in on your key messaging as well. And it'll also give you the types of discovery questions that you could ask for this persona. Now, anybody who's built a playbook or done training will realize this sort of stuff takes months. And then it takes months. You put it into some sort of workbook, and then nobody ever looks at it again. On the old model, it just stayed in the boot of the car or in the trunk of the car. So this was the critical piece that Vidal developed early on that I was really caught my eye. And then when clients saw it, they saw immediately, look, this could be hugely valuable to us because we never had this before. And then we took it another step. We said, does the language have a business, does the business have a language of its own, which we call a glossary? And a glossary is essentially the language that the business uses, particularly to differentiate itself. Does it use phrases and just words sometimes that are not like the language you hear from everyone else? So it got companies thinking, we need to maybe do a little bit of renaming. We need to think through what we're really doing. So we developed two types of glossary in it. You have everything that the business, there's 13 in this, that will be a fairly short list. This is language we use internally or externally, but then there's a language we use to differentiate ourselves. And you're actually judged on this when you're doing the practices. In other words, you're meant to use this type of language because it's differentiates you, or sorry, I think I maybe put the wrong one in there. I should have put in the differentiation one. Yep, this is it. So here you've got a glossary of differentiation in terms of spreadsheet sustainability, audit anxiety. You can be a bit cynical about this in sales and say, look, it's just phrasing, it's just words. But you have a choice in sales to either think about the language you're using or not. And if you don't, there's a higher chance you'll sound like everyone else. So the other thing then that clients said to us was, there's very fundamental things missing in the business. Sometimes we don't even have agreement on an FAQ, even though we have one on our website. But could you take all our content and just turn it into an FAQ and give us the answers and see, are they the questions we should be asking? And are they the answers we should be giving? And just notice the first question here, you're roughly double the price of other options. What's the reason for that? And again, it was another CEO said to us, look, we have a different way of answering that every day. And it just depends who's doing it and depends on the day. But really, there should be one answer to it. It's not really context dependent. There's a reason we charge more. And there's a way of explaining what we do. Or how would you suggest I explain this to my colleagues? We should be fluent in all of those answers. What's interesting is businesses have all this information already. It's just they haven't been able to turn it into a language without getting into writing War and Peace. And that's obviously what the AI piece does. It makes this transfer across to creating this language playbook so that eventually you get to the point where you can say, look, we had a ton of content on Google Drives. We had a ton of content on individual drives. And now all of a sudden we have turned that into a language for ourselves and we're all agreed on it. And we can study it at our own time, go into our own studio. When we get a new hire on, they can be up to speed in this in a week. So that's the building blocks part of it. So John, I'm probably going to get you now to do a little bit more work on the studio side of it. So we're going to move over to the actual practice studios themselves. What you essentially have in the tooling is a set of studios. You can call them modules as well. Just refer to them as studios, where it's like the gym in a way, in that you can practice and get conditioning in different areas of skills, and then eventually pull it all together into what we call plays or sales plays. So we're really just going to look at the messaging piece this afternoon. and show you how you can use a studio to develop your skills, develop your language, develop your fluency. So we get started on that. So what actually happened in practice is if the company was Ecosphere, you actually will be given a learning path. So there's a whole, let's just assume there's a new hire in the company this week and they kick off and you say to them on Monday morning, you've got a whole onboarding path here available to you. There are 6 or 7 parts to it. I need you to get started on it. Now, traditionally to do something like this would have involved buying software that's in the hundreds of thousands, and it would have taken probably several months to commission it. This is at the other end of the scale where it doesn't take that amount of time or anything like it because the AI is doing a lot of the work and then we're acting as the enablers in the middle. But you might say to the salesperson, look, there's onboarding number 2 there. That's our whole narrative, messaging, and language. I need you to get started on that. And they essentially will be presented with a screen where you'll see there, the first thing there is Derek. That's one of their personas. So what the tool is asking them to do is it's asking them to just get in and start practicing. So you're straight in. My own view on this is different people disagree with me is I think you should be doing this by 9:30 on the first day in the job. This is what you really should be focused on. I know you have to do your orientation, you have to do all the other stuff, but this is the stuff that makes the difference in the sales role. Do you have the fluency? Can you do the basics in the business, and then can you do the more advanced stuff? So, John, could I ask you maybe to talk through what's, this is a practice screen. I'm on my first day in the job. They've given me an office to go off to. I can do it at home as well. And it's me and the bot. It's me and Derek, who's in this case the vice president of global supply chain management. Yeah. So, John, you might explain what you want me to do.
Sure. So, Michael, let's just say you're onboarding. You're new to the company and you're getting ready to engage in a little bit of practice. What we probably ought to consider for a moment is what's going on behind the curtain. Behind the curtain, there's an exemplary conversation. It's the thing your organization would like you to say. And that exemplary messaging is built into the rubric itself, the way this is going to get scored. And because there's a comparison point other than just simply asking the internet how to do a good job in sales, you now have the ability to get this practice session done, but then get a feedback report that's going to very closely match what the system's looking for. So first and foremost, behind this conversation is a rubric. Now, it's not fair to keep that a secret, is it? You ought to have some access to how am I going to be scored? And so the evaluation criteria is available to the sales counselor. It's not supposed to be a secret about how to get a great score. You've got the terms available to you right here. Now, not all sales counselors like to read playbooks. So if you wanted to just simply get a shortcut, just tell me what you want from me. This is an innovation, Vidal. I think it is just lovely. You can now simply click on play instructions and the persona will tell you what they want from you in this moment. So if you want to click play, let's hear what they have to say.
I actually play it.
This is a basic proposition practice where you'll answer 4 core questions. What is it? Who is it for? What's different or better about it? And why does that difference matter? You'll be scored on how clearly and confidently you address each one. The goal? To help you build fluency in your value proposition, using your own words, but grounded in your company's language of differentiation and glossary. When you can do that well, you don't just sound confident, you sound different. And when you sound different, your company does too.
Sometimes they're much longer. The explanation is much longer, but that's a relatively short one. You can also visit the criteria and see, look, this is what I've been asked about. But you can also read the criteria in the screen and literally follow it. Now, we learned this as we went along. We have 2 modes in it. We have what we call practice mode and scored mode or live mic mode. Practice mode is take your time, get a cup of coffee, do it over and over until you start getting more fluent in it. But you'll notice as well, it has popped up the glossary terms it wants me to use. It says, these are the real terms we want you to use. Yeah. Because these help differentiate us. Yeah. And what the salesperson has really been asked to do now is, having read or studied and looked at decks and all the rest of it, it's time now to actually do the thing in their own words. And that's the hard bit. It's translating it across to your own words. So it's everyone saying the same thing in their own words. So what we're trying to do with this screen is we're trying to give people as much help and direction to help them get there. And maybe the other thing worth pointing out on this screen, John, would be it does a little bit of feedback on, let's say, the soft or emotional reactions of the salesperson as well. I don't know.
Yeah,
if you do that with your clients.
For me, it's just a great magnifying glass on blind spots you hear in your own voice. I noticed my internal conversation versus the words I was saying. I had the impression that I was filtering my internal conversation. And when I stumbled over a phrase, it came back and the analysis came back and said, we're hearing a lot of contempt and anger in your voice. And that was a huge surprise. So the vocal insights is paying attention to how you're showing up. It's not the words, it's the tension and tone of your voice. I think that's actually very interesting to pick up on as you're going through. When you're
different people seem to react differently to this area. Some people, I think, are looking maybe a bit more at the emotional side of it. Others are looking just at the sort of hard-nosed language that's happening. So let's show you now what happens in terms of, if you've done a series of practices, what the actual feedback looks like. You can see here there's a little curve, and that means that our salesperson is called James, by the way, right? So James started just under 20% of the score, and he eventually got towards the 80% mark. So that's the way we work it. We say, look, try and get to 80% plus in terms of the scorecard and the fluency that's required. Now, in this particular case, it took him eventually 7 attempts. We call that time to fluency. So if you see here, you can begin to see his scores. So again, think of this as Monday morning, new job, and you do your first pitch, you get 13% in it. And by the way, some people are surprised at the percentages. They don't agree with them. They think it's being too cruel. But remember, you didn't come into the company because you generally can sell. You came into the company to learn the company's language. You didn't come in to import in your own language. You came in to learn theirs. So it's actually makes total sense that you get 13%. And maybe, John, do you want to talk through a piece of feedback? Yeah.
Sure. So this feedback report is, of course, it's got multiple sections. At the top, if you scroll up, there'll be just a very brief statement from the prospect that you were talking to, the persona you were talking to. From their perspective, here's how they experienced you. And you can either read through that, or if you want to listen to it, that's fine. You can hit play and it'll just talk to you and say what it says. The sections below, one is the literal transcript, what was said back and forth. And that's for future reference. It'll also highlight if you did use one of those terms that is not appropriate. And then what Michael's showing now is the score based on the criteria that you and your organization put in the rubric, the scoring rubric. You can go 0 to 10, you can go 0 3 5. You can decide how close or how literally you want this to be, and you can weight your scoring. That's a custom decision on a per studio basis or even a per conversation basis. The terms that you used. Did you use terms in the glossary? Did you miss an opportunity? In this case, they had lots of missed opportunities and no used terms. And that's to be expected. It's their first day. They're just getting this information. But what's cool now is you have a feedback loop. They can take another swing immediately. They don't need a boss to come in, review their transcript, review the recording. This is going to happen immediately. And the studio, what's interesting about these personas, they have infinite forgiveness. They don't care how badly you just messed up. The next time you try it, you can adapt, you can adjust, give it another swing, and it will score you very objectively. And so this is very difficult for a regional sales director to do. It's very easy for the system to say, it's a new day, let's start fresh, take another swing. And I think that feedback loop and the speed with which you can get to proficiency, that's been an eye opener for my clients and the ones that are using it for their onboarding. Is they're surprised at how fast a new skill can be introduced and proficiency achieved.
The rep now, after I think it's about maybe 5 attempts or so, they're actually 73% now against the scorecard. This is the same rep. It was at 13%, another 73. The reason is they're following the guidance and they're starting to fill in all their gaps. So you can see the criteria. I mean, this particular question that was been asked was basically, what is it you do? So it's day one stuff. And you could be quite experienced in sales and quite experienced in a company, and it could still be a difficult question to answer or to answer fluently. So you'll notice now straight away, they're starting to use more terminology that belongs to the company. But again, this is just one practice. In their onboarding, they might have 30 of these. So the idea is that by the time you compound all of that, by the last Friday on your first months, you're definitely conversation ready. You've got the sound, you've got the fluency. Now, obviously, when you go out in the real world, you get the wrinkles and the creases get ironed out. But that actual jump from 13 to 73 is only about 5 or 6 attempts in that one item. You just need to follow what's in front of you. Now, if it doesn't translate eventually into sales and performance in the field, that might be a different issue. You might even be in the right job. But what we're doing here is the company is saying, look, I'm going to give you the language. I'm going to get you fluent in it. And I'm going to give you as much time as you need to just, I think, John, you call it taking a swing. Yeah. So when you do that, then there's another bot in the background adding all this together and saying, okay, how are we doing overall? What sort of progress are you making? Where might the gaps be? I know there's plenty of sales managers actually on the call today, but everybody wants to do coaching. At some point, everybody wants to do more coaching, but in fact, this is doing much more effective coaching. I don't know, John, the extent to which you use this at this point. It's a relatively new feature. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Our larger portfolios, the regional salespeople are making amazing use of this because they have 12, 15 people that they're trying to support in different cities. And to be able to take a quick snapshot of someone's most recent performance, their last 20 assessments, and to walk into the meeting with that sales counselor, instead of spending a whole bunch of time trying to figure out where the gaps are, you've got a roadmap for where you want this conversation to go. And it elevates a regional sales leader's conversation with their sales counselor. It elevates it from status and storytelling to a performance development conversation. How do you want to work on these areas that the system seems to see a gap? And the coaching report even gives you direct recommendations for practice that would address what it's seeing as issues. It's not judge and jury necessarily, but boy, is it a great head start on a good performance development conversation with a sales leader.
Pretty common one there, actually, it's actually here as well, is explicit persona and stakeholder mapping. The stakeholder or the persona one comes up all the time where we have a general message, but not for particular personas. And certainly it's one of the things I've seen myself through the platform, just that need to help salespeople develop language per persona rather than have this general language or general playbook or general messaging. And some of my own clients are beginning to use this a bit more now, but they're astonished at just the level of detail from a fairly small number of practices. So it means that if you're meeting a salesperson in an hour's time, you've got actionable recommendations, and the salesperson isn't going to disagree with you because they produce the practices and they're probably already working on it. That's a broad, Vidal, I don't know if you have any questions at all coming in at this point. That's pretty much the gist of the product. There's lots of there's obviously no shortage of features on it and so on. But do we have any questions coming in?
And Yeah, from the gallery, if you're in this room and you stuck through this much, I'm curious about your use case. What do you have in mind to address in your organizations? And we can see whether there's an opportunity to help you get down the right road.
A number of people quite a number of people couldn't make it to the webinar this afternoon, but you did put in some questions or some broad queries about it. One of them is it's very suited, let's say, to new onboards, how suited it is to existing salespeople, given that they have so much experience. And none of us likes being asked to take the driving test again. So my experience with it is, it depends partly what the manager wants in the business. This is a manager-led tool. It certainly raises the whole standard of application and language in the business. Maybe that's the biggest decision you have to make as a manager. Just what level do you want to bring in? And it's another level of precision, and it depends on your growth goals as well. And so on. It's not trying to challenge anyone to say you can't sell. It's saying, do you think you're as fluent in your current business as you need to be? Because you're leaving the differentiation on the table. That's the issue. It's not really how good or bad are we. It's, am I getting the differentiation across in my daily life, right? Am I getting more confident in what I'm doing? Am I actually turning that value proposition into a language for sales? I think.
Could I add something there, Michael?
Yeah.
I think for existing salespeople, because I do hear this a lot, who do have the ability to upload existing conversations. So if you do record the conversations, and then they can also be graded against the use of the glossary, the rubrics, the FAQs. So then you can see whether the existing salesperson already meets the standard or not.
Yeah. So I think there'd be probably a good number of people on the webinar would have recorded calls, for example, and the transcripts. And for example, the rubric we showed you today, or the scorecard, what is it? The answers to those questions. You could, instead of a sales rep doing a practice, you upload their recorded script, for example, and you immediately begin to see the gaps. That's a new feature now that's come in the last few weeks, but you probably have a ton of stuff around that you could, through a machine like this, get huge insight into where the gaps are for your salespeople. The other piece that we've just introduced recently is what we call reverse playbooking or reverse pitching. In other words, suppose you have a salesperson, let's just say they are pretty experienced, they know the business well. They get their score up to around 80%. I want to know what causes an 80%. So enable me to turn that back into a little playbook so I can see what that person is talking about. So if Vidal's producing 80% all the time, it's not that I want to copy his words. It's that I want to know, what is it he talks about that seems to resonate with people? I'll put my own words on it. So we can reverse that, press a button, put it back into the playbook, and it's available to everyone. That old idea of could we clone our top salespeople is literally available thanks to AI technology. It really wasn't available before, because even salespeople didn't even like telling you what they did. And sometimes they say to you, I don't know, I can't remember. Whereas this way, it's been literally been recorded and they've practiced it, and they probably fine-tuned it a little bit for themselves as well. It's amazing. If you could capture what's already in the building and begin to reverse it that way, you're actually not short of language. It's just not necessarily workflowed or organized into a pattern so that you could systematically learn it, get better at it on a daily basis. Maybe take more risks. Yeah.
So Michael, Gavin had an interesting use case. I wanted to just touch on that because I think it's a perfect example. The question is getting sales reps for partner companies. So these are not your employees, but they represent your product as an OEM provider. Correct me if I'm wrong, Gavin.
Well, spot on, John.
So you have the language of, say, your equipment, your component, and you'd like other folks to get at it. With your studio in place, you could quickly send an invitation. You could quickly enroll someone in a learning path. It doesn't require the full breadth, your entire offering, but the thing that they have to get good at, you can do a quick learning path with the resource and some practice sessions. And you can, hey, there's money on the table here. You could incentivize, hey, anybody who can get and hold a 90 on this, I'm feeling pretty good about. We can you can offer some sort of incentive to gain that fluency. And that would be a very interesting and a very practical use case.
I've done some of the partner work myself. And I think most people will say, look, partners aren't always that fluent in the sales part, or they're a technical partner sometimes. So they don't really care as much about the sales. It's a difficult one. There's always a difficult one to get right. But if you're a salesperson in a partner, your primary interest is what language sells this product or service. Now, if it's a very big brand, it's not only how does the brand sell it, but most companies aren't big brands. They need the language. In fact, I'm increasingly seeing here that language is the substitute when you don't have the brand, but it's the same as having a brand. It's the same thing if the language is good enough. There's a little bit of work in progress to do that, but an interesting, if you like, Gavin, it's an interesting benefit to bring to your partners. Maybe they would really appreciate it and say, this will shortcut me, because otherwise I'll have to make stuff up. And I'd have to make up a version of you that's not maybe that real, but it's my version of you.
Again, Michael, like you
Just
say,
not.
you put them on training courses for a week and they forget 80% of it 24 hours later. And every one of these sales reps should be representing our solutions as best as they can, but the consistency is so poor. And I think that something like this could help do that. Because again, it's always about how do you measure people. That's the real challenge. Or at least I found that.
Yeah, and Gavin, to your point, the system is designed for targeted performance development for anyone who has a gap. And if someone has a gap in effectiveness, they have a gap in the fluency of your language, you can point them back as one of the things we'd like to cover between now and next week. Hey, let's make sure you're aware of these enhancements we've made in this last round. Could you get me to a 90? And given the power dynamic, of course, that might be a persuasion thing, or it might be a dollar thing, or it might be their boss saying, hey, we really want to see this particular area of fluency. Peter had an interesting question around sales counselors or salespeople engaging from a personal level too. And I have to say, Peter, I completely agree with you. Their ability to be fluent in the language is just one of the pillars. The other pillars do have to do with, do they have a process that encourages ongoing engagement through a decision? Are they being trained on re-engaging someone who has disengaged in the past? And each of the learning paths can include, is this a resurrection moment? I'm in the database. This is someone who said, maybe it's my job to get them back up on my board. How am I going to structure that conversation? So one of the feedback items that we have in our conversations is, did you ask for and achieve a next step? How many times did you ask, and how many were agreed to? And if you can get people selling in your teams consistently asking for that next one, that's where you're going to get higher engagement, shorter sales cycles. So yeah, it's a very interesting question. I thought it was a good one.
Yeah.
Can I?
Sorry to interrupt. I know we're at time, and I think some people are dropping, need to leave. I don't know if you wanted to leave them any. We will share the recording and all that. If there's any next steps you want to share with people, Michael and John.
Yeah. Leave it there then. It was just on Peter's comment about the subtlety of the process. And I think I'll take an interpretation of it, but there's a lot to making a sale, right? It's not just one practice, but it's one of the things I've been helping Vidal with is, you say something like it's consultative selling, which always sounds easy. There's always an easy book on it, but consultative selling is like 100 moving parts. It's not one skill, it's 100 skills compounded. And that's one of the jobs we've been doing here, is to break down what sales really is. It's good behaviors, it's language, it's hygiene items. And when you start to break it down, you would suddenly begin to say, maybe it's not the job for me, because it's getting those moving parts right. So we've developed behind us a whole set of scorecards, rubrics. It's like one skill, it's 100 skills, it's 100 scores. Then you begin to build it up, and then you begin to realize Actually, the subtlety is in the small steps. And it's getting good at one thing and then building on the next thing, which is not the normal sales mindset. The normal sales mindset is a stroke of the brush. It's a single stroke of the pen. I'll just kill the sale now. I'll get it now. And I think this is the new version of sales where people are really beginning to develop their micro skills, build them up. So I think it's just a brilliant point Peter's brought up there. I hope I interpret it somewhat correctly, Vidal. Yeah. I suppose we need to start wrapping up for good timekeeping. Yeah. We're more relaxed here, Vidal, about time sometimes.
This is my American you.
Yeah.
I just want to thank everyone for coming, and I want to thank you, Michael and John, for putting this on. I really appreciate all your work and support. We can stay on. I don't have to go.
Yeah, no, we will wrap up. We will be obviously sending the recording over the next few days to folk. Yeah. And we'll send you some links as well where you can contact us if you have a query or an interest. Yeah. So thanks to everybody. Really appreciate the people who registered, turned up, weren't able to turn up, sent us questions and so on. We've had actually a very good level of interest. I think about 150 people in all expressed a different level of interest in actually quite a number of countries as well. Yeah. So thanks to everyone again. Thank you.